With Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness fast approaching and opening the doors to the multiverse, I decided it has been a long time coming that I explore a certain part of the multiverse with my reviews. This is my review of X-Men. In a world where evolved superpowered humans known as mutants exist and are discriminated against, two groups form for an inevitable clash: the pacifist X-Men and the supremacist Brotherhood. But before I properly start with my review for X-Men, I want you to let me know your thoughts on it in the comments below. What does this movie mean to you? What was your first experience with it? Anything and everything down there. And I'm going to be reviewing every single X-Men movie ahead of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So if you don't want to miss any of those, if you love movies and TV, this is the place to be. So consider clicking that subscribe button so you don't miss any future conversation on your favorite movies, TV, and X-Men. Back in the year 2000, comic book movies were just not what they are today. For better and for worse. They were not even looked at as the same thing. They were not looked at as respectable stories that could have important themes, good characters, and good stories in general. They were looked at as these kind of B stories that were just for kids or for idiots until this film came along. Now before this we had Blade, but Blade was in itself a B movie and it leaned into that to great success. But X-Men in the year 2000, directed by Bryan Singer, look, I'm just going to be talking about Bryan Singer as the director of this film and nothing else. To this day, you ask any Hollywood producer that was working at the time, and this was the film that opened their eyes that we could take comic book movies seriously. They could be good movies. They could have this vast, wide appeal. They could dive into these different genres. They could be great movies in themselves, and this was the first great one. This was the one that opened the doors for the incredible future that we're living in now. It's easy to forget, even compared to comic book movies these days, how somber of an opening this film has, but at the same time, how great and even historical a foundation laid with just the opening of Magneto as a kid with his mother in the concentration camps. It's jaw-dropping to this day to open a film just like that. No expository dialogue, just a gritty look at the darkest reality in humanity's history, effectively showing us our antagonist's reasoning to the point where at first you kind of feel like this kid is going to be the protagonist, where it's just him pulling on those gates, tearing them down to be with his mother. The Nazis have to knock him down. It's a powerful scene, and that compels us to his cause. And the rest of the film in itself is equally as grounded, as it clearly understands what the X-Men have always stood for, have always been about, and immerses us into this reality with fabulous world building. It displays the conversation around mutants with great nuance. Some see it as a gift, some see it as a curse. The themes of discrimination are entrenched in the entire film, but it's not just that they're present, it's the way the film handles the discussion around them that makes it hold up so many years later. The government wants to register mutant, very similarly to Civil War, where they wanted to register superheroes, where they want to know who is a mutant, what they can do. It's the way the government in the film wants to politicize what is basically not a political issue whatsoever. They want to weaponize this in a way that it does not make sense, because we're talking about basic human rights. But it's the whole discussion that now makes so much sense in the year we're living in, where 22 years later, after this film has come out, we're still kind of discussing these same things. And it makes, in retrospect, this film feel so fucking brilliant with how it discusses these things. But this film doesn't just hold up through its themes and story, It's the characters that are so compelling, and at the heart of this film is a fractured friendship between Charles Xavier and Eric Lensher, aka Magneto, and it's one of the biggest things that I've always admired about this film. You can have these two extremely opposed ideologies, but through their performances, they still carry deep love and respect for one another. Not to mention that these characters were perfectly cast in Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen. They ended up casting it perfectly twice, but we'll get to that in a future review. And I love how the film portrays both of them. Magneto comes across as this Blofeld kind of villain, but much more compelling, not just through his scenes where he doesn't really attack anyone. Like, he makes one of the governors, one of the senators rather, a mutant itself, and that's how he attacks this guy who was basically a racist. And it's all very compelling stuff where they're just using ideology to make their point come across. And his arc through this film, along with Xavier's, they're beautiful mirrors to one another, where the film solely treats them as these two friends who drifted apart but know each other so well. They know what makes each other tick. They know exactly the move each of the other is going to make. And that knowledge about how one another sees things, about how one another thinks, and they still don't carry any hatred towards one another, but simply their extremes of trying to achieve this world of peace for mutants, is so different. And that knowledge that they have is their biggest asset, but at the same time, it's their biggest vulnerability they have against one another, yet neither one is willing to exploit that, to use that against the other. And that's what's so compelling about this relationship. But they are not the only characters that are cast perfectly in this film. This film is not only historical because of the doors it opened for the future of the comic book movie genre, even though that's not actually a thing in my opinion. This introduces us to probably the fan favorite actor to ever be cast as his comic book counterpart, and that is Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. One of the many great examples throughout history of an actor being cast as a character that the internet hated. Now, back in 1999, the internet had a much lower sounding voice than it has today, but Hugh Jackman, he wasn't even the second choice. He wasn't even the third choice. The first choice was Dougray Scott, who had to pass to be in Mission Impossible 2, and then they even went to Russell Crowe, who himself said, "Hey, you should check this guy out," and we should all be thankful to Russell Crowe for that. Wolverine's introduction in this film is one of the best in history. He has used the discrimination and the way people see him as his monster to make a living. He survives because of the discrimination that exists. He made himself this kind of lone wolf that just goes around from place to place, constantly traveling. He has almost lost his humanity. He has become the animal, the monster that people see him in, until Rogue, played by Anna Paquin, comes on. And these are two great POV characters. One that just rests on his own laurels. He spends his entire life alone. He has this great big memory loss thing that we'll get to in the second film, in the next review. And then Rogue, who just had her powers manifesting for the first time. And these two are great examples of what the film is exploring thematically, where one sees what he has as a gift. It allows him to make a living. It allows him to survive. He asks no questions. But she sees it as a curse. And I love this relationship and how it develops throughout the film. We can point out that it should have been Jubilee, the character. Everything about this character is Jubilee, apart from her powers. But I think in adaptation, this really works in the film's favor. Once they're found out by the X-Men that help them out, and then they get taken to the school, and Wolverine's just distrustful of everyone. I love the scene where he wakes up and starts to try and escape, and he's going around the school trying to find a way out, and you have Xavier talking in his head. It's just a great sequence that ups the intensity, and it makes you feel disoriented along with him as he's running around in the school. But it's that relationship that makes him stay, and in a way, this film for Wolverine is about him rediscovering the humanity he had lost, learning to trust others again, learning to care for someone else, that being Rogue. And it's only when he begins to trust others and begins working with others that they are successful. That third act fight scene at the Statue of Liberty where he finally trusts Scott and they kick Toad's ass and Mystique's ass. The fight between Wolverine and Mystique is awesome. Mystique, played by Rebecca Romijn, being another big standout in this film. And it's just a good third act for this film in an interesting location and fully bringing the arc of Wolverine through this film to a great conclusion. There are issues with this film, however. It's 22 years old, so on a visual spectrum, some of the visual effects, as studios were starting to use CGI of what they had at the time, some of it doesn't hold up too well. Some of it does surprisingly hold up very well, particularly Senator Kelly's transformation when he's in his mutant kind of blob form, because he's basically becoming water slowly. That works rather well. It's some of the other things like Toad's tongue sticking out and when Sabretooth gets thrown off the Statue of Liberty. Scott's rays from his eyes are not the best looking either, but that's really the smallest of the issues the film has. Structurally, it feels rather episodic, like these small vignettes, these small moments of a television show were a bit crammed into the film, like when Wolverine and Rogue get saved by Scott and Aurora at the beginning of the film when they're first attacked by Sabretooth, and then the scene just fades to black and ends. It rather feels disjointed sometimes how the film is moving from place to place. And while the conflict at the heart of the film in Xavier and Magneto and Wolverine and Rogue are very well handled, these are fully developed three-dimensional characters, the film certainly has an issue with its supporting characters. I think the one that just gets by is Jean Grey in this one. She is rather interesting because there's a lot of friction between her and Scott, who is her boyfriend, and then Wolverine as he comes in and he starts to feel a little bit of attraction. But then a ton of the other characters are basically just references. Scott is there because he's Cyclops from the comics, and Aurora is there because she's Storm from the comics. They get a little bit more shine in the sequel, but in this one they feel like they're just there and they could be any character that fans would recognize, and that just sticks out as a sore thumb when you have so well developed characters leading the film, but then the rest to round it all out just doesn't feel as well rounded. But X-Men is not just a great movie. It is a revolutionary one. It opened the doors for an entire genre to be respectable. With its compelling themes, it offered us a fantastical world and fantastical characters, but it grounded it in a mature film with deep storytelling. Many films have done it since, but this one did it first. I'm giving X-Men an A-. But those are only my thoughts on the original X-Men. It has been a long time coming that I talk about these films, and I cannot wait to talk about all of them in the weeks leading up to Doctor Strange, but I want to know what you thought of the original X-Men. Anything and everything down there. Of course, spoilers go because it's 22 years old, and I cannot wait to talk to you guys next week about X2 United and all the other X-Men films ahead of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next reviews, and I cover Moon Knight every week, so go check that out right now. And thank you to my channel members Bruna and Stewart for making this video possible. I'll be back very soon with more reviews, and there's a ton right now up on the channel. And so until the next one, love each other and love the movies.